I send my love over the mountains. I send my love over the sea. I send my love into the heavens, and it returns to me. I send my love over the mountains. I send my love over the sea. I send my love into the heavens, and it returns to me. I send my joy over the mountains.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday nights. We are back in full effect, and we are so blessed to have the amazing Reverend Guy Williams in the house. Yes, yes. And we are streaming as we always do. So tonight, Reverend Guy he has extended that he will also do some teaching. And so that microphone, when he's ready, I'll bring it over in the center so you can ask any questions that you like, so people online will be able to hear you as well. And also, I will remind you later, but also to just say right now, we have a lovely, there it is, it's coming. a lovely tithe basket and blessing back there in the back. This is a way to support Reverend Guy being here for the magnificent work that he does. So without further ado, please let's bring to the stage Reverend Guy Williams.
I really hope I'm not supposed to do an opening song. Actually, you really hope I'm not supposed to do this. Let me organize myself here. Anyway, thank you guys so much for having me here. And what an auspicious night it is as well. It is your first Wednesday night experience. And for those who come from a Christian background, tonight is the first night of Lent, which is known as Ash Wednesday. So when Kevin and I were texting back and forth, I was saying, so Kevin, do you want me to do like an ashes part of this thing? And he's like, whatever. So anyway, but we're not. We're not, but I am going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the Jesus story some this evening. So trigger alert if you've got a little something going on with that. And, well, I'll get into why, but one of my favorite stories in the New Testament is a story known as the Transfiguration. And it's interesting because of the four Gospels, it's mentioned in three of them, and it's almost mentioned verbatim in each one of them. And the story is essentially this. There's first of all, there's a whole lot that builds up to it, but at the point where the story begins for us this evening is Jesus has taken three of his disciples, Peter, John, and his brother James, up Mount Tabor. And as they're up there on this mountain, what begins to happen is the disciples begin to see that he begins to become radiant, his clothes, his face, his body. There's an aura of light around him where he's in radiance. And then they notice that two of the great prophets of their tradition, Moses and Elijah, appear, and the three of them seem to be having this conversation about things to be. So Peter, and Peter is always the foil in these stories. So Peter says, well, maybe we should build, tabernacles, tents for these people, and whatever. And then what begins to happen, they said, is this cloud comes over, and they enter into this cloud, and then it says they become terrified. So I kind of want to play with this for several things. One is because it's very personal to me, as we'll get into. But one of the reasons I like this story is that one of my spiritual heroes, a man by the name of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a poet, he was a geologist, he was a theologian, he was a Jesuit priest, he worked on Peking Men, he was out in China. But this was one of his favorite because what it exemplifies is this idea of the veil between spirit and matter actually is impermeable. In fact, what Teilhard would say is there really isn't a distinction between spirit and matter. It's called spirit matter. And those of us who are students of New Thought, of metaphysics, certainly understand this, that we live in a universe that is permeated with this divine essence about it. And I think in terms of Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of our particular teaching, something that I use in great consolation, those 3 a.m. when you're wrestling with the angels, almost a mantra is, there is one life. That life is God. That life is my life now. And there's this experience how everything has this experience of this divine in it. But I think also what it does for me, if I can share, is those of you who know me know that I often, glibly say that if I was to have a scripture, it would be Lord of the Rings, because it's just such an engaging story. Or I think the American Bible really is Moby Dick. But I continually come back to the teachings of Jesus, because for me, they are so compelling. But I want to put this in a context, if I can, because before there was a Christian church, there was Jesus. But before there was Jesus, there was Rome. And unless you put Jesus in the context of the Roman Empire, it really doesn't begin to make sense. But if we can sort of layer this idea of who Jesus is in relationship to the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, without getting into a big history lesson, and again, I can nerd out. But when we look at if we look at something like the Transfiguration, if we look at something like what Teilhard says, or if we look at something like what Ernest Holmes says of this unity of spirit, what I want to share is a quote from Rabindranath Tagore, who was an Indian poet and a writer, a teacher. He was a very close association of Mahatma Gandhi. In fact, he was the one who gave Mahatma Gandhi the title Mahatma, and Gandhi gave him the title Gurudev. So they were very close. But what Tagore says is this. He says, union with the divine does not have to be achieved. It already exists at the heart of our being as pure gift. We simply need to remove the obstruction of the self. So in many ways, I think that this experience of Jesus on Mount Tabor with his disciples is exactly that. It's sort of like what William Blake says: when the eyes of perception are clear, we shall see all things as they are, divine. So we have this perspective, but this perspective in the context of Rome. So Rome existed about before the time of Jesus. It existed about 1,000 years. And about 500 years before the time of Jesus, it was a republic. In fact, the framers of our particular government, our republic, looked with great admiration on the early Roman Republic. And if you look at a map, you can see cities named after some of the great statesmen of them. But about 27 CE, Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon, and the Roman Republic fails and moves into this experience of tyranny. And as Jesus is coming into the world, he is coming into the world of the Roman Empire. So empire is an interesting word. John Dominic Crossan, who is a biblical scholar, says this. He says, the word empire is synonymous with globalism. And globalism is an extraction economy that simply moves into other areas and colonizes other areas for their resources, whether that be in the ancient world, grain or oil or precious metals or whatever the case may be. But it is when one country, one empire, globalism, decides that it is going to extract the resources and subjugate the other people. It's almost like there's this viral infection in human consciousness, I think. I wonder sometimes about that. Because as you look at it, empires come and empires go. They rise and then they fall and another one kind of comes into it. And it's salient for us, and I think that the story that I want to tell today is salient because this is what it means to live in late stage empire, globalism, of what that looks like, of how we look at others as commodities, as ways to fund our own ambitions. Again, Tagore says this. He says, "The world is waiting for a country that loves God and not merely herself." So it's the sense of where we go with this. And so at the time of Jesus, Israel was a vassal. It wasn't Israel. There was no such thing as Israel. Actually, well, I won't go there, but there kind of isn't a state of Israel. But there were other petty kingdoms that were all vassal states under the Roman Empire. And the way that it was structured, you had the empire, and then he had client states with client kings, and then he had his own personal representations of him, thugs, governors. And, it's interesting because Tiberius Caesar, who would have been the second Caesar at the time of Jesus, says his title was the Lord and Savior of the world. That was Tiberius Caesar, the Lord and Savior of the world, because only he could save the world. Only he could bring peace. Only he was able to negotiate where no other person was. Of course, that's completely different than the world that we're living in today. But here you have this person who's offering this other way of where we live and how we do these things. And one of the things that I would offer is this, is that Jesus did not come to start a religion. And if you read any of the stories in there, there's no insinuation on his part that he's doing anything other than being part of the prophetic tradition. And the prophetic tradition that comes from Judaism is simply, Walter Brueggemann, who is a biblical scholar, says that the prophetic tradition was always calling the kings to justice. And justice is, as Brueggemann would say, justice is finding out what belongs to whom and returning it. And that was the emphasis of what Jesus was teaching. Jesus was offering a way of looking at the world that was different from that. Instead of a world that was based on power and strength, he was offering or envisioning what it would be like to live in a world on justice that was based not so much on overpowering, but on reconciling. Not so much of conquering, but including all in. Dr. Holmes says this. He says, we partake of the divine nature, and the divine nature is in us. The recognition of this is being born of the Spirit. But we cannot be born of the Spirit unless we do the will of the Spirit. And the will of the Spirit is goodness, peace, mercy, justice, and truth. It is the conscious union with the divine. So, in that, and in the time of Jesus, and in the time of the prophetic tradition, and even now, from the perspective of the prophetic tradition, we must ask ourselves, what is the role of government? What is the role of government? According to the prophetic tradition, the role of government, and there is a role of government, is to secure justice. So I know what you're thinking right now. You're probably thinking of Benjamin Leonard. Benjamin Leonard wrote a book called Republican Theology. Now, what I want to offer is, even though he says this is Republic theology, I think it's probably just as equal to democratic theology as well, because they both feed from the same trough. But what Mr. Leonard wrote in his book is that sort of the national theology that we have is not the role of the government to secure justice, but rather to secure individual rights or individual expression. And therein lies the tension, right? How do we create a society that is either based on justice or individual liberty? And that's kind of the tension that we sort of find ourselves there and even there today. So I've been sitting with this. And last week, the practitioners at my center, we meet every week. And we check in and we pray for the community and we see where things are. And when it came to my turn, I heard myself, when people asked me how I was feeling, I said, I'm sad, I'm angry, and I'm afraid. I'm sad, I'm angry, and I'm afraid. And I want to take this back to this story. Because what happens is, in the story, it says that this cloud comes over them and God speaks and they are terrified. So a couple weeks ago, I was out in Point Loma and the clouds came in. And they're not scary. They're wet, they're cool, they're foggy, but they're not scary. I've seen plenty of clouds, but I think it's kind of interesting that whatever this writer was saying, and by the way, when I'm telling this story, the important question to ask is not how did this happen or did this happen or how could this happen, because that was not how these stories were written. They were not written to answer a question of physics. When you read stories from any sacred scripture or any important books, The Lord of the Ring, Moby Dick, the Bhagavad Gita, the Christian Bible, the Hebrew Bible, whatever the case may be, the stories, the question isn't how could this have happened? The question is, what does this mean? And so what does it mean to be in a cloud and be terrified? And whoever wrote this first, it seems like it was Mark, why did he include that? So I would offer this. Have you ever flown in a jet? And have you ever seen the clouds? And when you see the clouds coming, I don't know about you, I'm not a big fan of flying. And so when I see those clouds, my response is to be terrified, because I know it's going to be bumpy. I know that it's going to get rough. I know that things are going to happen. And as I'm sitting with what I'm feeling like I'm in this cloud. And even though there's a voice that says, listen to what is being taught, listen to what you hear, it doesn't make it any less scary. It doesn't make it any less sad. It doesn't make me any less angry. And again, you know, what we know from New Thought is we can't heal anything that we can't tell the truth about. If we can't name it, we can't heal it. And so it's not so much running from these experiences, but for me, it's kind of like taking solace in this story. Because, you know, again, flying on an airplane is the way home. And maybe where we are today, the way home is through the cloud. And what I think that means for me is, yes, this is a very scary time. Yes, this is a time of deep sadness and grief. And yes, we have every right to feel what we're feeling, even anger in that. In fact, I would even add after last weekend, disgust or shame. But it's okay for us to feel all those things. And as we enter into this cloud, we recognize this is the way home. Sometimes new thought can sort of candy coat things and say, you know, it's perfect, whole, and it's complete. And all we have to do is think happy thoughts. And I'm not sure that that's helpful right now. I think it's more helpful to be genuine of what we feel. And as we are entering this cloud, the solace that we have, I think, are two things. One is we have each other. We have the ability to be with each other. And the power of love and the power of community is remarkable. And then the other thing that we have is this idea that there is one life, and that life is God, and that life is our life, and that it is forever luring us. Because when we contrast these things, you know, Alfred Lord Whitehead once said that when the Christian church aligned itself with empire, what they did is they took all the attributes of Caesar and placed them on God, so that the God that we understand historically within the church, and I'm not to criticize the church, because the church has done some remarkable good, but when you have a God that is all powerful, when you have a God that is nothing more than a giant Caesar, that God doesn't feel. That God doesn't listen. That God is top down. But if we look at it from a different perspective, that there is a presence of unrelenting love that is forever luring us, inviting us, showing us a way that is saying, listen, pay attention, but the way through is going to be scary. The way through is through the cloud. It's through the obscurity. And here's the thing I think that's interesting about this, is we really can't hope if we think we imagine what the future will be. Because hope isn't about imagining a future. Hope is about opening ourselves to guidance. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But what we do know is that we have each other. What we do know is that there's a presence that is there. And what we do know, following this prophetic tradition, is that we're being asked to engage. Wendy Farley, in her book, Beguiled by Beauty, says this: let us lament, but let us conspire together to embody the world we yearn for. Let us lament, let us grieve, let us be angry, let's do all those things. It's appropriate. But let us come together and conspire to create a world, the one that we yearn for. So that's what I got for you guys today. This is kind of where I'm playing. What I'd love to do is open this up to a conversation or questions, and then I kind of want to talk, you know, Kevin has invited me to talk about classes and something that you would be interested in, because there would be no point in me coming down here doing what I want to do if nobody else is interested in it. So, but anyway, so any questions or comments on what I have said this evening? Yes. What is the Rubicon? The Rubicon is a meme. Does anybody know what the Rubicon is? It's a river. It's a river. So in the Roman Republic, there was a law that said that no general, and Julius Caesar was a general, no general could bring his troops to cross the river Rubicon, which would go into the territory of Rome. And when Julius Caesar brought his troops across the Rubicon, it was a statement of crossing the line. It's kind of like maybe challenging the Supreme Court. You know, there's a line that is drawn, and when this line is drawn, it's evidence that something big is about to happen. That's why we use it as a meme. To cross the Rubicon means that you've crossed the line. Yeah. Good question.
One other question: that what the top of where did he go? Mount Tabor.
Tabor. Yeah.
Where is that?
It's in Galilee.
In the Holy Land? I mean, like
Yeah, in the area of Palestine.
Palestine. Okay.
Yeah, which is where Jesus was. You know, contrary to what many people think, Jesus never left Palestine. You know, so it's there. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to take more time, but wasn't there someplace in Armenia where supposedly there's a mountain where Jesus was?
No, but in the book of Genesis, there's Mount Ararat.
That's what I'm
which
talking
is
about.
the story is that's where Noah parked his ark.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah.
Yeah, different story, different guy. Yeah, different guy, different story completely. Yes.
Well, being raised as an activist in the 60s, I keep looking for what to do. And I keep, going through the principles of we're not responsible for what happens, but our reaction to what happens. There's a whole philosophy of sacred activism. Can you speak about that a little bit?
I can tell you what my struggle is with it right now. My struggle with it is as an ordained New Thought minister, which I love and I adore and I'm grateful for, but historically we have been noticeably missing. And part of why we have been noticeably missing is we don't identify ourselves in this prophetic tradition, something that Dr. Martin Luther King or Dr. Abraham Heschel or any of the early civil rights activists would have, because how often in our teachings do you hear the word justice? We hear prosperity, we hear wholeness, we hear happiness, we hear good, fabulous things, but we don't have a theology on justice. And so, for myself, this is something that I'm struggling with too. And I think ministers, colleagues, we're all kind of, what do we do? And who do we follow? It's interesting that the followers of Jesus were accused of atheism. They were accused of atheism because they did not align themselves with the God of empire, with the Roman theology. I found it really interesting that Franklin Graham, son of Billy Graham, accused William Barber of being an atheist, because the prophetic tradition does not align itself with the state theology. And so for us, I think that activism is an important thing, but something that I've been pondering, this has been a meditation of mine, pardon me for going off on a rant, but this has been a meditation of mine for a couple weeks when I first heard this, is there was a Dutch woman by the name of Corrie ten Boom. She wrote a book called The Hiding Place, and her family were hiding Jews in Holland during the war. She had a sister, and her sister's name was Elizabeth, and Elizabeth said, "We have to love them, because when this is all over, they will need us." And she wasn't talking about the Jews, she was talking about the Nazis. We have to love them, because when this is all over, they will need us. So, deep breath, everybody. So Dr. Holmes says we see the condition on the outside and we heal it on the inside. And if we look at somebody like Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, his whole thing was, and going back to the prophetic tradition of Jesus, love your enemies. Because the world that we're wanting to envision is not to replace empire with empire, but to reconcile. We're not going for power, we're going for reconciliation. And that's tough, and it's scary, and it's hard. Yeah. So I don't have an answer other than that. That's a struggle that I'm in. Yes?
I have two questions. You mentioned the Peking man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you explain about the Peking man? That's my first question.
Probably not well. So this is what I know. Teilhard is like a hero of mine. And Teilhard was writing some stuff that was so radical that his brother Jesuits exiled him to China. There he was on the slopes of Mongolia, as far away from what they figured he could cause trouble as anybody else. He was a geologist by training. He was a Jesuit priest, and he was a geologist by training. And so Peking man was one of those early discoveries of early hominids. I don't know where it fits in the whole stratosphere of all the other, Australopithecus and all those other hominids that were there. I don't know where it fits in that, but that's kind of where it was. But Teilhard was on the dig that found those remains.
The other question I have, you mentioned obstruction of the self, removing the obstruction of the self. Can you explain more about that?
So I can speak personally. So there's a part of us that is driven by our ego, and I think the ego is a good thing to have. It's what gets us up in the morning and gets us dressed and gets us to go to work and relationships and all the things that we do. However, the ego actually thinks that it's running everything. You know that little voice inside your head that says there is no little voice inside your head that's telling you when you're wrong about this, that, and the other thing? So, something that Thomas Merton says is he says that that spiritual abundance, that sense of living in the goodness of life, or what Jesus would say, I came that you would have life and have it abundantly. What Thomas Merton says, spiritual abundance comes from a connection to the divine and identifying with our true self. And what I would say is the obstruction of the false self is the thing that gets us into the trouble, the thing that says it's mine. And that's, where two or more are gathered with ego, you have empire, you have globalism. So it's stepping back from that.
And just a comment, in the darkest cloud, light can permeate, and I think of the Episcopal Bishop Marianne Budd, or Buddy. I think that's her name, Buddy. And the other is the vote today by the Supreme Court, 5-4, to allow USAID.
Yeah. Something that Emma Curtis Hopkins says is do not be deceived by appearances. Because what we don't want to do is create false hope by saying, look, see, it must be getting better. We have called something onto us that is remarkable. And what I understand President Trump said last night is that he's just getting started. And what I believe about him is he's always telegraphing what's going to happen. So if he says he's just getting started, I believe that. But even more, it's time for us to conspire and to love and to envision another world. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
How would you suggest that we conspire to live and love this better world?
How do we do that?
Yes.
I think what we're practicing it here. I think it's how we see each other, how we serve each other, how we celebrate each other, how we fall in love with the earth, how we make love be the guiding principle of what we do, and how we allow that to translate. Like I said, we lament, we grieve, we feel what we're feeling, but we choose love. We choose love again and again and again. And I'm not saying it's easy at all. It is. It's easy not to. Yeah, but I think that's where we go. Anyone else? So yes, Greg.
Jeff at the Dharma Bum was talking about equanimity in dealing with these issues. Would you speak to that?
Yes.
The idea of equanimity, to
So-
fight but love?
Yeah, yeah. So, do you all know who Dave Rubin is? He's a music producer. Powerful man, huh? Crazy. I don't know if he's crazy. Big hair, big hair. Yeah. So I was listening to him on a podcast, and he was talking about this, and he was talking about the meta prayer. The meta prayer, may I be filled with loving kindness, may I be well, may I be peaceful and at ease, may I be happy. And what he says is we should practice the meta prayer for a year, saying, may I be filled with loving. He says it will take about a year for it to be integrated into us. And then after a year, we can start holding that prayer for other people. So before you start saying, may Uncle, Harry be filled with loving kindness, practice may I be filled with loving kindness for a year. One of the things that New Thought has is we understand, first of all, one of the main tenets of New Thought is thoughts are causative, and that the conscious mind can direct thought. So we use things like affirmative prayer and affirmations to sort of work our conscious mind. And so I think equanimity comes from that. I don't think, so something that my teacher used to say is that social action without spirituality is boring, and spirituality without social activism is narcissism. So the equanimity is finding that balance of affirming our own divine magnificence and at the same time living ourselves. Can I just rant on this one for just a second? So let me give you an example, personally. I can speak on Wednesday night as a personal thing because I know Sundays are people coming in for the first time. I don't know, you're here for the first time? I guess we're all here tonight for the first time. So here's a challenge that I'm sitting with. So there is a man who owns a newspaper and owns the largest, most convenient way of shopping that has ever been imagined in the history of mankind. You can, in the privacy of your own home, decide you want something and push click, and dear God, the next day it's there. It's phenomenally. However, this is also an organization that busts unions, participates in environmental degradation. There is a cost. There is the price of what we pay and the cost of what we pay for that kind of convenience. So I have decided that I am no longer shopping with this particular store. And oh my God, it's really hard. It's really hard. So if I want a book, boom, the next day there's the book. Or boom, the next day or that minute it's on my Kindle. If I go to someplace like bookshop.org that supports a local book business, it costs more and it takes longer to get it. This is the false self, right? Or, I am a carnivore. I'm a kapha body type. Meat is good for me. I've tried vegetarianism, it doesn't work for me. However, what I also know is that if I simply go to your local Albertsons and buy, burgers, I am supporting an industry that is promoting environmental degradation, unspeakable horror to animals that are there. There is just, and so how does one, and of course I'm speaking to my own white privilege in this too, but how does one live in this world and not participated in that way. You know, if you look again at the teaching of Jesus, I'm on a rant. If you look at the teaching of Jesus, you know, and his temptations were all about him becoming the next Pharaoh, the next Caesar. But you will be a good Caesar. You can feed them. You can dazzle them. You can do this. You can do that. His temptation was to not be another Caesar. And then you hear in the Gospel of John, you know, he's speaking to the emissary of empire, and he says, my kingdom is not of this world. And we kind of leave it at that, like when you die, you go to heaven kind of thing. But that's not what he's saying at all. Because if you continue reading that verse, he says, my kingdom is not of this world. Because if it was, you would have a riot on your hands. You know, if it was of this world, then we would respond accordingly to the way of the world. You know, war begets war, empire begets empire. So what he is saying is there is another way of doing this. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I'm entertaining myself here. Yeah, but so to get back to equanimity on this, it's identifying with that part that is uncomfortable, inconvenient. It is looking at how do we live in this world, and I'm not sure how we do it successfully alone. I think the only way that we can do it is in community. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, I want to thank you, and two things. One is, first of all, what a pleasure it is for me to be here, and you're getting me at a time in my life, in my ministry, where I'm struggling with this very thing. I was an old hippie, I was an old activist as well. And I love New Thought, and I have a critique of New Thought. And I find myself, for what is lacking in that, the teachings of other masters, Rabindranath Tagore, Jesus, Abraham Heschel, you know, those who were there, the visionaries before, going back to them. And so this is my process as well. So thank you for letting me share it, because it's scary and it's risky, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going with all of this, but it's compelling to me. And I feel as a minister in the world today that I want to align more from the prophetic tradition than not. The other thing that I want to say is this, is I'm an egghead, you know, I'm a nerd, and I love to teach. If you've ever had classes with me before and you've thought, you know what I would like him to teach? You know, if you would write that on a list there, I'll discuss that with Reverend Kevin, and we'll see if there's any interest in it, and we'll go from there. Yes? So, you know, if you're asking me tonight, so I have taught extensively in the School of Ministry, Metaphysical Bible. I think it's a really interesting study. I think, where does New Thought find itself in the world that we're living today is another really interesting conversation to have. Spiritual practices is something else as well. And if anybody wants to do a study group on Lord of the Rings, man, I'm so down with that. But yeah, so those are thoughts that I have. Maybe you have other thoughts as well. Anyone else? Yes. Get the mic there.
What is your perspective on the LA fires?
What is my perspective on the LA fires?
Yeah.
They happened. So it is a direct result of climate change. I don't think that we can deny that. I don't experience God as someone who intervenes or teaches lessons. That would be a very fun class to teach. Is my experience is God is not omnipotent, omnipresent, or omniscient. but is still the presence of unrelenting love. Because for God to be omnipotent, there would not be love. And if there's no love, there would be no freedom. And what we know is that it is a God of freedom. So I don't believe that it was created by anybody to teach anybody a lesson, but I think it's a consequence of where the world is right now living in climate change. Yeah.
Thank you for being a bright, radiant light.
And how we're dealing with it is empire. Yeah. Anyone else? Then let us pray. I love what Emerson says. Emerson says prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. So let us just breathe into this moment, recognizing that there is one life, one intelligence, one experience of unrelenting love. Martin Buber was once asked if he was an atheist, and he says, if you mean someone who talks about God in the third person, yes, I am an atheist. But if you mean someone who experiences the divine personally, no, I am not. So it is about that which is as true to us as the very breath that we breathe, the life that we live, the experience that we have. It is personal to us. And it is the presence of love, always. And recognizing the words of the great teacher Jesus, that where two or more are gathered, that presence is realized, not that it is brought in because it was always there. But just like one candle, two candles, three candles illumine a room, there's a greater presence of love. Jesus taught the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And what he meant is every time we choose love, the kingdom of the heavens is present. It is at hand. And so may we be filled with amazement, wonder, and awe. May we be surprised daily and reminded of the presence of love. And in doing so, we acknowledge in that moment the kingdom of the divine is at hand. And I bless us all in that consciousness, giving thanks, letting it be, and so it is.
Thank you, Reverend Guy. Let's give Reverend Guy another big hand. That was awesome. Super awesome. Really beautiful. And thank you all for coming out tonight for our first Wednesday night. There will be many more. Reminder, Reverend Guy's class list of possibilities is back there, so please check that out. And also that lovely basket that's right there at the end. Please check that basket out and leave all the loving giggles and love. And to all of you online, thank you for hitting the QR codes and sending the ding, 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 ding. We love it, we love it, we love it. Have a blessed evening, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
I send my love over the mountains. I send my love over the sea. I send my love into the heavens, and it returns to me. I send my